So before we start, it occurred to me today, over the years, I've taught many different things. I've taught and continue teaching Navi, Kuzari, Tfilah, Mesilat Yesharim, Pirkei Avot, bunch of things. And years ago, I tried to teach Tanya. And I say tried because I got through about, I don't know, maybe 2 chapters, did 5 or 6 lessons, and I stopped because I was ill-prepared. I mean, beyond ill-prepared. And I stopped. But I found back then that it was taking me longer to prepare one of those classes than any other class. And I find with this, as much as I have learned in my own, and now that, to learn it for yourself and then to learn it to teach it in 2 different worlds. And it takes, for every 45-minute class, I'd say it probably takes me an hour and a half, 2 hours preparation time over a couple of days. And for those of you who've heard me say this before, that part of the thing I love the most in teaching, besides the interaction and the teaching itself, is I like the preparation. So it's a labor of love. And I hope that I'm able to put it into this class as well. Welcome, Adina. Good to have you with us. Good afternoon. Hopefully it's not too cold in good old Chicago right now.
We're used to it. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not. It was 40 degrees here today and I was freezing. So 40 Fahrenheit. It better not be 40 centigrade. Hello, Judy. Okay, what we're going to do, let me just go straight to a slide to start our evening off. I'm going to give you a little preview of tonight. Doesn't mean we're going to get all this done, but this is the goal. I want to finish reading chapter 2. We're going to discuss the last paragraph, which I mentioned last week, is not in the original Tanya. Some classes I've looked online do, and some don't cover it. It'll discuss the influence of the mother and father's union when conceiving a child. I want to explain to you the concept, I'm going to do that right in a moment, of what a levush is and what it is relative to neshama, so you'll understand the word in this chapter, even though it's going to be discussed in depth 2 chapters from now. We'll take a quick summary of chapter 2 when we finish this last paragraph and begin chapter 3 with an introduction. And I'm going to leave that last bit to, I'll change the statement. We're going to have a guest speaker, so to speak. I have about 8 minutes. You're going to watch somebody else, not me, explain something, because why would I reinvent the wheel when someone does a great job of it? So what I want to do is let's go to the text itself. We're going to finish up chapter 2. I put a little arrow here. Let me make it bigger. Now the arrow is not going to be in the right spot, but okay. There's a left bracket right after it's a vav mem shin, which stands for umashe katuv or mashe katav. Okay, that's where we're going to pick it up where it says umashe katav bezohar ubezohar chadash. I'm going to read the whole paragraph, the rest of the paragraph, and then I'm going to go back and explain it. I'll translate it as we go through it. We have to go over it to understand it. Again, the topic of this chapter 2, which we're going to finish now, is the nefesh elokit, the godly soul, the soul that is given to the Jewish people, the chelek eloka mima'al. Again, the peace of God in a spiritual sense, the direct peace of God, mamash. Umashakatul bezohar ubezohar chadash, that which is written in the Zohar and the Zohar chadash, she'ikar talui she'kadesh atzmo bishat tashmish. That when it says that a man and woman are conceiving a child, that they should do so in a situation where their thoughts are filled with kedusha, and that affects the baby. Davka mashe'en ken b'nei amei haaretz, which doesn't happen with the amei haaretz. I'm going to explain all this. Hainu mishum. Why is it if a person? Actually, let me translate first. Hainu mishum she'en lacha nefesh ruach u'neshama. She'ein la levush minefesh de'atzmut avi ve'imo. There is no child that is born, Jewish child, with a nefesh elokit. There's no Jewish child that is born whose neshama does not have a levush that has been influenced and part of his parents. Okay, what is a levush and what is going on here before we continue? In English, the word levush is clothing, right? You put on a tilboshet, right? You say in the morning, malbish arumim. We thank God for being the ones who clothes those that are naked. So levush is clothing. What's the difference between your pancreas and your skin and your eyes and your clothing? Well, if I want to, I can take my shirt off and change shirts. I hopefully will do that tomorrow. I hope. Okay. You can remove your clothes. You can put your clothes on. You can wear different types of clothing. I'm going to be casual, then my clothing is going to be casual. If I'm going to go to something formal, I may be in a jacket and tie potentially, depending what country I'm in and depending what I'm attending. You can change that. The point here he's about to make is that, that when it comes to the neshama is static. We're giving this neshama. However, we have levushim. We have those things that are going to help the neshama be revealed. For example, a person may be empathetic. A person may be an angry individual. A person may be a caring individual. A person may be selfish. Those, and not to even mention the physical differences in people, those are the levushim. Those are the levushim of how the neshama expresses itself in this world, because the neshama doesn't do anything. The neshama elokit doesn't do mitzvot. We'll see what this means. Right now, it needs to be kind of very basic so you understand. We have the neshama and the levush. Levush are the coverings or the clothing, and we're going to get a little bit more into that in a little bit. So let's just continue to understand what he's saying here. Again, at every child, no matter if they're the lowest kind of person they could possibly be or the greatest kind of person, they receive their levush from their parents. The parents' union does not affect the neshama itself. V'chol mitzvot she'oseh, that every mitzvah that a person does, hakol al yedei oto halevush, all the mitzvot that that child does as she grows older, is done through the levush. In other words, how I approach a mitzvah, how I do a mitzvah, how I give tzedakah, how I treat people, that is my outer. That is not my neshama. It sounds a little strange. We're going to see later why. But that's how the neshama expresses itself. The origins of those levushim are the parents, just like we would say DNA. We know that the person's personality is also able in one way or another to be passed on to the child. And this is a form of what is being said. And therefore, if there's a feeling and sentiment of kedusha at the moment of union between husband and wife, that has an expression and therefore an effect on a child when that child is born. Even the great goodness that is given to the child, to the adult as he grows up from Hashem, hakol al yedei levush zeh, is all the levush is what receives the shefa. In other words, does my neshama care that I get X amount of shekel in my bank account? Of course not. Doesn't make any difference. As a matter of fact, the neshama hates this world. We're going to have to deal with that at a later date. The neshama cannot stand being in this world. What does care? I care because I may be a giving kind of person. I want to be able to give tzedakah. I want to be able to put food on the table. I want to put a roof over my head. V'im yikadesh et atzmo, and if at the time of union between husband and wife, he is mekadesh himself, meaning he has proper thoughts, yamshich levush kadosh lenishmat beno. He will pass on a level of kedusha of this levush to the child. Va'afilu hi neshama gedola tzricha lekiddush aviv. Now, remember we said that there are tens of thousands of different levels of neshama. It also means that even though a child may be invested by a neshama from Hashem, that's a high level, they still need the advantage of the parent who has the proper thoughts at the moment of union in order to invest that neshama with a levush that's also kadosh. Aval ha-neshama atzma, but the neshama itself, hinei lefamim nishmat adam gavoa, ואין קץ בא להיות בנו של אדם נבזה ושפל. I'm going to read this and explain. כמו שכתב אריז"ל, כל זה בליקוד תורה, פרשת וירא וטעמי מצוות, פרשת בראשית. What does this mean, this last piece? So let me just do something here. Take this off the screen share for a minute so I can talk to you. And move you over here, put this over here. I talk to myself a lot when I teach, by the way. And by the way, when I'm in stores, if you ever see me standing in like Super Farm and just standing next to some aisle of stuff and you just see me talking and there's no one there and I don't have a phone in my hand, I'm not going nuts. It's what I do, unfortunately. I was once standing in a store years and years ago in Chicago, and I picked up a product from the shelf. I said, wow, that is really good price. And it was in that loud of a voice. You don't do stuff like that in public. Okay, fine. In any case, sometimes the soul, the neshama, of an amazingly unbelievable, tremendous tzaddik starts off from a very lowly individual. In other words, we said that the levush of the individual is going to be infected when the husband and wife are together conceiving the child. So in theory, if they say that you have the proper ideas and thoughts, then the levush of that child around that will enrobe that neshama will be higher level spiritually. But we also know that there are people in our history who were tremendous gedolim with tremendous neshamot that came from exactly the opposite kind of a background. For example, they had, let's say, a dubious pedigree. Rebbe Meir, the Tana, came from a family, probably a family of Roman emperors, which means, now we know that Rome is a descendant of Esav, which means that he comes from an Esav background. But there's other reasons that the Arizal tells us that certain people will have to go through, or certain cleansing processes to get an neshama to explode, so to speak, into this world. I'll give you a couple examples. Rabbi Akiva also came from a very humble background. He said that his soul was on the level, for example, of Moshe Rabbeinu, and the Moshe Rabbeinu himself didn't come from a perfect zivug. Yocheved was the aunt of Amram, which at that time was perfectly fine. Today is not okay, from the time the Torah was given. And probably the most prominent of what we hope will be the great, tremendous neshama that has a dubious pedigree is Mashiach himself. Just think of the background. Ruth, David and Bathsheba, Shlomo, Naamah, Ammoni, the soul of David HaMelech, who is considered the fourth leg of the chariot that's going to bring Mashiach. All these had this neshama was enclosed in a klipa for some reason that needed to come down from generation to generation and become into this, go through this cleansing process in order for the neshama to become the neshama of a Moshe Rabbeinu, or to become the neshama of a David HaMelech, or of a Rabbi Meir, or Rabbi Akiva. So it's a couple of things he's telling us here at the end of this chapter. On the one hand, we know that, as he says, the Zohar tells us that no matter what a person does at the moment of union between husband and wife, it does not affect the actual neshama itself, because that's a chelak elokam imal, it's a piece of living God, and you can't affect that. What you can affect is the kedusha, or level of kedusha, that the levush, for those who came in late, the levush are the attributes with which the soul connects to this world by whether it's a person has a cheerful disposition, a miserly disposition, a giving disposition, empathetic, and all these things. That's what it affects. But he tells us the opposite also we need to know. We say, look at somebody, at some person who may come from really a terrible background. And yet, and I don't mean terrible as they're bad people, I'm saying they were not the holiest of people. And yet we end up having a person with a tremendous neshama, because there are certain reasons that neshama needed to be, quote, cleansed. I'll go a step further, which he doesn't say in Tanya. This is actually brought in I want to say the Malbim, but I'm not positive. I gave a class on this a few years ago, I should remember. That he gives the example of the reason that it had to go through so many iterations like this in some of these neshamot is to trick the Satan, because the Satan says, look at this neshama, look at what it comes from. I don't need to deal with this neshama. And therefore the neshama, so to speak, the Satan, so to speak, turns away from that particular neshama. The neshama then is able to come down into this individual and then become the Moshe Rabbeinu, or become. Now, if that's not clear, that's okay. It's perfectly fine. It's not necessary to understand the rest of Tanya, at least at this point. But it's important to understand that our actions, this is one of the things he wants us to understand, our actions do affect our children in different ways. That's not what I want to share. I want to share PowerPoint. Here. Okay, so I want to read to you, with you, a bit of a summary of this chapter, to kind of put things together here of how we can understand what happened in this chapter. Again, we met, so to speak, the Jewish neshama, the neshama elokit. Hasikum hu, this is Rav Steinsaltz. Hasikum hu shekol adam Yisrael, that every Jew, gam shafel shebishvalim v'gam katan shebiktanim, the lowliest individual, the smallest individual, hu chelek elokam mima'al. That's the first thing we have to understand, and we learn in this chapter, is that every single Jew has a piece of Hashem. Hu bichlal banim atem laHashem. Children or people are divided by what they receive from their parents. By the way, this is not a chiddush whatsoever. We know that the idea of genetics, let's just put the Torah part away for a second, or aside. It's not putting it aside, but because it's part of Torah. But I'm saying, putting this aside, we know how genetics plays a role in the children's birth and development and character traits. So too in a spiritual sense. How? Bilvushe nafsham, in their levush. Be'ofen shebo mofiot haneshamot umevatot et atzman. How it will affect how the child's neshama will reveal itself, or interact with this world and express itself. Bnei Adam nivdalim gam b'chelek shenoten b'hem hakadosh baruch hu b'shoresh haneshama me'em lemala. We also know that we're different. He's discussed this in this chapter, of where the shoresh of this neshama in heaven comes from. Whether it's a big neshama, and we're not using physical terms, obviously, or a small one. Will be a very rounded, a well-rounded neshama that will deal with things in the area of kedusha. Oh, skipping the parentheses, neshama ktana, or be a smaller neshama. Whether this particular individual, whether he does a mitzvah or he does an avera, will still remain in neshama ktana. All this is the concept, as we talked about before, that there are tens of thousands of different types of neshama elokit. They all source in Hashem. And we discussed how it's through the Hishtal Shalut, which we're going to go back to in a minute, how they come through the worlds and come down to the individual. Like I just said, the most important point we have to understand is every single Jew's neshama is a chelek elokam imal, no matter what level neshama that is. There's no difference between my neshama and your neshama and the neshama of your next door neighbor and your friends, your Jewish friends, meaning they all are chelek elokam imal. Kulam banim hem lashtatem lashem. Kamo achim betoch mishpacha, no different than siblings in a family. Yesh mutzlach, yesh pachot mutzlach. There are some siblings that within a family they're more successful than others. Yesh chacham, yesh tipesh. There's some who are smart, and then there's my brother. Just joking. Yesh tipesh, and there's the fools. Couldn't miss that one. But beyond that, there's one point that everyone's equal. Shukulam him banim. They're still all the children, right? If my brother's more successful than I, my sister's more successful than I am, right? Let's assume for a moment they are. That doesn't mean that I'm different. I still have the same parents. We come from the same DNA source. It does not change if I am a bad person or I'm a good person, or my brother and sister do good things or bad things. That does not change our source. Our source is still my mother and father. That doesn't change. Same thing is true when it comes to our neshama. Whether a person's neshama is a higher neshama or a lower neshama, it still has its source in Hashem. So before we continue, we have to stop and ask ourselves a question. Before we begin chapter 3, and I give you a little bit, a tiny bit more review on this chapter and a look ahead. What is the purpose of all of this? What's the purpose of learning Tanya? Why do we do it? Now, if you ask me why do you learn Mesilat Yesharim, it's to say, okay, I need to see how to do mitzvot better, how to pay attention to what I shouldn't do, what I should do, how to elevate my spirituality a little bit. If I ask why do you learn Mishnah Berurah, I want to learn halacha. Why Tanya? And now we can start at least to give a beginning answer to that question. We said that, remember that one of the chidushim of the Baal Shem Tov was, in the Arizal, is that there is concept of godliness, elokut, also known as elokus. What is elokut? Godliness. That's our Jewish neshama. That's our godly neshama. The purpose of Tanya is to make our lives more godly, to focus more on Hashem and connect better with Hashem. This is a key piece. We're going to see this over the next many months. It's not just focusing on Hashem. Okay, I say, Shiviti Hashem l'negdi tamid. I shall set God before me at all times. That's great. Like when you are about to do something, you think, does Hashem want me to do this or not? That's a tremendous level to be at. But how does that help me connect better to Hashem? This can only be accomplished if we understand how we are wired and what tools we have to enable that connection. Meaning, I don't have to know how electricity works in order to take my cell phone and plug it in to make it charge. I don't need to know. But if I want to be an engineer that's going to build a better cell phone, and I need to know how the workings go, I better know electricity better than I do now, which is pretty much nothing. Before we look at this and we start chapter 3, just a couple more words about this particular chapter we just did, an introduction now to chapter 3, and a look ahead as well. One of the things that Rav Steinsaltz did not mention in the Sikum, in the summary, was something that was very important we'll need to know as we enter the next chapter. And that is this idea of the Hishtalshalut Olamot. We talked about why is it in this chapter that if all the source of the Nishamot, the Neshama Elokit, is up here by Hashem, is a Chelek Elokam Imal, then how come your Neshama and my Neshama are different? How come the Neshama of a Jew sitting in prison right now here in Israel, he's sitting in prison and we're sitting here learning Torah? It's the same Neshama Elokit. So we talk about the idea how it comes down from world to world. It went through the world of Atzilut, and we talked about Atzilah, Bria, Yetzirah, Maaseh, and Asiyah, which I just really flirted with around for a little bit. Just take my word for it. It just goes down from one level to another until it comes in this world, and it becomes it comes into an individual. And as it goes through those worlds, that neshama is affected to be a, quote, higher level neshama and a lower level neshama. And that's also, he talked about in this chapter, that if we look at ourselves, every generation is one koma, one unit or one column of people. You have the tzaddikim and you have the non-tzaddikim, say at the bottom. So how does a person connect better to Hashem? If they have a lower neshama down here, they connect to the tzaddikim. They connect to the chachamim. They connect to those. Doesn't mean they're better. It means their neshama has a higher level and connects to Hashem. And therefore, by connecting to those, you're connecting better to Hashem. Much more on that, obviously, later on. Now that we know we have a neshama elokit, we talked about neshama, the neshama bahamit, the animal soul. Then he talked now in this chapter about the neshama elokit. And as we enter chapter 3, we have to ask ourselves the following question. I know now I have this soul. Shkoyach, very nice. What's it made up of? What do I do with it? In order to understand how I use my neshama elokit and then eventually my neshama habahamit, I needed to know how they're made. What's the anatomy? So chapters 3, 4, and 5 will deal with the anatomy of the neshama elokit, of the godly soul, how it expresses itself, and what we do with it. Chapters 6, 7, and 8 will do the same thing with the nefesh habahamit, because we can't forget that one. We'll also do the same thing by looking at the anatomy of that soul. After we finish all that groundwork, it will give us the opportunity to start to answer, not completely, but to begin the process of answering the questions that we started off in the very beginning of the book in chapter 1. It'll also help us to understand, once we've learned the anatomy of the nefesh elokit and the nefesh habahamit, will also allow us to understand what it is and how Tanya describes and defines Tzaddik, Benoni, and Rasha, very different from almost every other text that exists discussing those titles. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a look at the first few lines of chapter 3. And then I'm going to go to a video that's going to be about 6 minutes. It'll show 8 minutes, but it's only because I'm doing it at 1.5 speed because he speaks slowly. Over the years, when I learned Tanya, I did not learn from this individual, but I've come across his explanations sometime, and I find them far better than I can do on certain topics. And once in a while, I'll pop him in or somebody else, the one who I actually learned from. I'll play a video from YouTube of him explaining a basic fundamental principle or idea, and tonight he'll help us a lot. So I'm going to read the first few lines, and we're going to listen to some background. Okay, I'm going to read from, let's say, from beginning, from the word vihine to the word, maybe to the word midot, maybe not even that far. Vihine. This is the beginning of chapter 3. Let me make this a little bigger also, in case you have trouble seeing it. Vihine. I want to see if I left myself a note here of anything I should say first. No. Okay. V'nei kol bechinot u'madrega mishalosh elu nefesh ruach u'neshama kilula me'eser bechinot keneged eser sfirot elionot shenishtalshelu mehen hanechlekot l'shtayim. Our neshama, our nefesh and ruach and neshama. Now we use the word neshama as a generic term, but our neshama is actually made up of 3 levels, which we're going to get into tonight, maybe tonight. It's made up of 3 levels, which I made reference to already before. Nefesh, ruach, neshama. The Rashi Tevot is also referred to as naran, nun resh nun, naran, nefesh, ruach, and neshama. That our 3 levels of neshama are actually made up of 10 faculties, 10 attributes, however you want to translate it, that are representative of the 10 sfirot. The 10 sfirot are the 10 emanations of God. You're going to have to hang on for 1 minute to understand this. That came down from through the worlds and also divide up into 2 main categories. Okay, there's a lot of words, a lot of numbers, what's going on. First, a general concept, and then we're going to listen to this video. Some of you are familiar with what's called the sfirot. Netzach, Hod, Gvura, all these words that you sometimes, the one place that many people encounter them is during Sfirat HaOmer, because you'll say Netzach Shebehod, Hod Shebehod. These words are called the 10 sfirot, or in English they're called the 10 emanations of God. When you'll hear this video, you'll understand a little bit more what this is and how it connects to our neshama. Basically, the idea is that these 10 emanations of God have a corresponding 10 attributes within our bodies, with our neshama. And they're broken down into 2 groups, 3 and 7. Why? What do they represent? What are they? Okay, we're going to take a listen. And then after we listen to this, we're going to go a little bit more into depth of what he's telling us before we continue in the text. We'll get to that video. Move this here. Okay, his name is, if I get it up here, Rabbi Spalter. He is going to explain the connection between the sfirot and the 10 attributes of our neshama elokit. Let me just get it. It starts at 4. Come on. Oh, I didn't share sound anyway, so hold on. I need to share screen with sound. See, a good teacher would have been prepared and thought about that already. Why? Oh, I can do it like this. Like that. Sure. Nope. Wait. Okay, it worked when I was messing with it before. You know, this is when you go to a wedding or a bar mitzvah, they have a, hold on. Okay, so I'm gonna have to go into, okay, give me 1 minute. Okay, you're not gonna see what I'm doing here because I want to just run it, get it onto the screen, and then I will get it up and I will show it to everybody. Let me put the video on pause.
Thank you very much.
I completely forgot to record the second half. Okay, so what I'm going to do is when I post this, video, I will also post a link to his video. I'll also tell you the time frame in which it is to be watched if you want to see that again. But that's the only thing that'll be missing from the one from my video. In the future, should I put it on pause and I miss it to turn it back on for some reason, please feel free to unmute yourself and tell me. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. In the meantime, have a good evening. Hope all is well with everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I'll see you Bezrat Hashem next week. Tomorrow morning, for those of you who attend on Zoom, attend the Mesilat Yesharim class, the same caveat as tonight's class. Check on the group WhatsApp chat tomorrow morning before you come to the class and join to make sure there is class. Have a great evening, everybody, and a great afternoon for those of you in the States and wherever else you might be.